welcome to the Marina Perry Podcast. As always, I am your host, and today I have a soul sister of such radiance who has already been on the podcast. So that speaks to how highly I feel about this beautiful woman. This is EJ Love joining me for a second podcast, and today we are going to dive into the betrayal wound. We're going to dive into healing through heartbreak, and we're also going to dive into conscious sexuality, because you may not know, but EJ Love is a trauma-informed conscious sexuality thought leader. This is her space. This is what she does. She is so unbelievably transparent and authentic in this space, and that is why I cannot wait to dive into this conversation. So EJ, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's beautiful to be back.
It is. And actually, we commented off camera that we both had haircuts. Yours is somewhat more significant than mine, but I also feel like mine was a big deal. I want to know, before I ask my normal first questions, what prompted the shaving of the head?
Yes, so it was November last year. I was actually in a workshop and we were doing this meditation to connect to our higher selves. And I think the question was, what do I need to do, or what's the message I need to receive to step into the next level version of me and my growth and what I'm here to do? And the word that came to me was shaved. And when I came out of it, I was like, shaved my head. And it was really interesting because my reaction to that was like, actually, I could now be open to that. Whereas in the past, the thought of doing that would just be like, no way, I could never do that. That's wild. Like I could never, because I had a lot of my beauty attached to having long blonde hair, or, at least shoulder length hair. And even just having, when I used to cut my hair, and I'd tell hairdressers, like, just take the tiniest bit off. I want to have long hair because I feel beautiful and feminine when I have long hair. So the decision was to also release that conditioning around beauty and attractiveness being related to my hair. And also I feel like energetically I was holding on to a lot in my hair that needed to be released. And funnily enough, how I did my hair was in Bali, and we did a ceremony, and my partner at the time, he actually did it for me. He helped me do a beautiful ceremony. And that same afternoon, literally after the shaving, we sat down and we had a conversation about uncoupling, and we decided to end our relationship after 3 years. The same day.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into that, because you've been sharing, very openly online, and as someone who knew you inside of that couple and saw the beauty of the energy that you got to transmit as a couple, and also someone who knows that endings are just new beginnings. This is an awareness I've had in my life. So when I see uncouplings, it doesn't always make me sad, and yet it's something I lean into witnessing. And so I do want to dive into that with you, but I want to also honor the fact that normally on this podcast, I ask the two questions which you've answered before as a guest. So I'm not going to ask you your spirit animal or the superpower you would embody. In fact, what I felt called to ask you is, in the shamanic way, often we can, instead of talking about spirit animals, we can call them power animals that give us an energy or something that we need in a time of transition. And I'm just curious if there was an animal or an energy that you were at the moment walking with or moving with or calling in and activating in yourself. What might that animal be?
So the first thing that came to me was the panther. And the panther is about power and liberation, and also facing our shadows and our darkness. So for me, that's definitely the journey that I've been on, is facing a lot of my own shadows and darkness and having to feel a lot of grief. So yeah, I actually think I was doing a meditation and the panther came to me, and I was like, oh yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah, the panther is powerful. All right. So uncoupling, the conversation came up in November last year. For those who may not be listening to this in, current time when we're recording it in May of 2023, that's now what, 7 months or something since that conversation. Yeah. And yet I know online you talked about betrayal. So it sounds like there was a conscious decision to uncouple, and yet then there was an experience of betrayal. So wherever feels right to start, EJ, I just want you to bring what feels, valuable to us and share your story.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I'll say is like, obviously, this is only one side of the story. This is only my experience and what I've seen and witnessed and what I've experienced. And yeah, there's always two sides to every story. And I'm also very much someone who likes to come with them as much curiosity, compassion, sometimes too much compassion, and responsibility, self-responsibility as possible. And that was always been my intention is to do that. So I'm going to do that to the best of my abilities and in my sharing. And also like honoring the relationship that was for 3 years, which was a really beautiful relationship that we had, and yet it wasn't perfect either, as every relationship. So yeah, so it was December, actually the end of December. I traveled to November to Bali, and then I was there for a month. And at the end of December, and my partner had come over for a couple of weeks, and into December we ended their relationship, and we had the most amazing uncoupling ceremony. It was so beautiful, and it was all the things that I could have wanted, and we ended it in so much love and honor and reverence and just appreciating the gifts of our relationship. And we were crying, there were so many tears and holding each other. Like even the day that we uncoupled, we went out to this beautiful dinner, and he paid these the singers that on with guitars that come around the dinner tables. Yeah, paid them to sing us a song, and so it still felt like we were together to some degree. And then we even made love that night, and even though we were like, hell, we're uncoupled. And then it was the next day he was actually flying back to Australia. And so our intention was to really be friends, to work on a friendship, and to still work together. And he was working in training, and doing some work facilitating in some of my trainings. And yeah, that's really where I thought we were going. And one of the biggest reasons, there were a lot of pieces to why we ended, but one of the biggest reasons was because we were both feeling stuck, and I couldn't figure out like what was going on with me, but I needed to get back to me, which is one of the reasons I went to Bali, like was to really find myself again. And he really wanted to be on his own and go on his own journey and follow his own path. And so it was like really hard because we loved each other, but yet we both had this knowing that we need to go on our own journey, and we need to be by ourselves and not be in a relationship, and not be in a relationship with anyone. And he was very certain that I'm here like not to be in a relationship. And yeah, it was a constant conversation. And so where the betrayal happened and where it began is that I found out on New Year's Day that he'd had another woman pick him up from the airport from Bali, and it was very triggering for me, all my stuff around other women. And this has been a pattern for me in like almost every relationship that I've experienced betrayal. And I really thought like I have healed it this time. This is like done, like my partner's so loyal, like all these things. And so to hear about there was this other woman, and this is another woman who had flirted with him, who had in my perspective been somewhat manipulative and like trying to get him to help her with things, and just like that kind of that manipulative, seductress energy. And it was never shut down, like that was never really shut down. And there was some hiding around it maybe a couple of months before we uncoupled. And then I also wasn't informed that she was picking him up from the airport. And so all my stuff and all my stories and oh my God, how long has this been going on for? Like, all these things came up, and we did finally talk, and it was clear that there'd been nothing going on. It was just a friendship, and that he didn't want to hurt me or upset me by telling me that she was picking up from the airport. Whether all of that is true, I don't know exactly. But yeah, so that was like one of the first kind of thing that brought us stuff up, but we managed to clear that up and remain friends. And then it must have been a few weeks later, and this was the really hard thing for me, that really just sent me into a big like what is going on. I was like questioning everything. Was and you know what, I feel like a woman's intuition is so, like, I was like, something's going to happen with this woman, and I knew it from the start. There's something that's going on, like I feel it. And So I essentially said to, I'm sorry, no, I didn't say to him. I'd been in Bali, I'd come back, I'd run a training, and then I'd flown back to Bali. And this was in the February. And I received a call from him and a message saying, I've got something to talk to you about. And I immediately went to him, oh my God, my worst fear, he's going to say that he's like with her, like, no. And I'm like, I'm just being irrational. I'm being so irrational right now. And I actually messaged him and say, hey, I know I'm probably being a bit irrational, but I've got this fear that you're going to tell me that you're now with this woman. And, I feel like I'm just being a bit stupid, but so I just need to speak it and clear it up. Anyway, he jumps on a call and the first thing he says is like, I've decided to start dating her. And I just went into complete shock. And my first response was, are you joking? Like, you're actually joking? Like, that was how I responded. And I just cut sick. Like, I put it bluntly, like, it was like this rage monster came out. And look, I'm generally pretty calm person. And if anything, like, I've had anger, like, I've been suppressed my anger, if anything, and been grown up as the good girl, don't get angry. So for me to go into this rage, which he never saw in our relationship, had to be pretty like hurtful and pretty like painful for me. And yeah, I just went into this complete, like saying all things, you're a lie, you're all these things. There was no resourcing, there was no regulating my nervous system. It was all out the window. And I was in Bali where there was no support, no safety. I was on my own. I had some friends around me, but they weren't close. Like, they weren't like in the vicinity. Like, I just like felt like it was just completely unsafe. And unfortunately, what happened is that from since we have spoken since then, brought a lot of his fear up, and he shut down and blocked me on everything. And that was just like all my abandonment stuff, everything came up. And that was like one of the most painful things I think I've ever had to experience in my life, because of the love that we had and the trust and the safety that was already there and the security. And my response was, I was doing my feeling was like I'm basically being completely abandoned. And my source of my partner, who's been like my safe person, my home for the last 3 years, is now not available to me at all whatsoever, and just completely cut. And that betrayal, and the biggest betrayal was actually not the other woman, but it was the betrayal of, we're uncoupling because we're going to be on our own, and that is actually not happening. That almost felt like that whole thing was a lie, and everything that we'd done was a lie. Our uncoupling, like, and you're not honoring what you said that you were going to do, which was to be on your own, and we're ending this relationship because you want to be on your own. And I actually didn't fully want to end the relationship. I wanted to try and work on it, but inside I knew that he needed to go on his own journey, and I couldn't just, I was like, it's like that inner knowing that I was like, for him to be here, to be the man he's here to be, he has to go on his own. I feel it, I see it, I intuitively feel that this is his truth. And who am I, if I was to try and like manipulate him and be like, well, why don't we do this and why don't we do that and we could try this, but deep down he's like, no, I need to be on my own. Like, I wouldn't want to convince him otherwise, because it would be convincing him to go against his truth, and we could never have a relationship from that place anyway. So that really was the betrayal, was the, like, I felt like everything was a lie, and that he wasn't being truthful to himself or honest to himself, and betraying himself, and then I'm being betrayed, and all these pieces that came up in that.
And I really love the nuance here, and I want to just unpack it, because somebody listening might be, well, I don't understand how he betrayed you. Does that make sense? Like, someone might go, well, he didn't cheat on you, like many of us have experienced. You were already broken up and then he changed his mind. Like, there could be people experiencing that. Yet what I want to point out is, or maybe like bring deeper into the conversation, is this experience of betrayal being an absence of truth at any point. Does that make sense? And so when, and I can relate to something you said a little earlier when you said, there'd been a history with this woman, and you said, and there'd been hidings around that. You said something like that.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the keys in any woman or man who's been in a relationship where a partner chose to not share information. There's a lot of people who say, well, I didn't lie, but not telling a truth is a withholding of authentic communication. And sometimes it's more painful. And so, the conversation, or the place I want to take this conversation, is something that's very alive for me right now, and I feel might be relevant to a lot of people, is this piece. And I'm going to speak as a woman because you're a woman, and I imagine lots of women are going to listen to this particular podcast. But if there are men watching, I think there's great listening and watching. There are great learnings here too. So I have a sense that one of the biggest issues that is plaguing the men at the moment, and I'm speaking in genders, and if that, frustrates you, well, please sit with your frustration and just endure this conversation with us, is this unwillingness to tell women what is true for them because they're afraid of hurting us, or really what they're afraid of is us getting mad, if the truth be told. And there's this good boy, but it's not really good boy, it's a weak boy situation that plays out. And, as someone who has had betrayal in her life, again, as a pattern, and now is with a man who tells me really uncomfortable truths a lot, in ways that very often I'm like, I don't really want to hear it. I'm very attuned now to the difference between boy and when I say a boy, he can be a grown man, but I'm talking about the boy wound of, I don't want to get in trouble, so I won't tell.
Yep.
Versus the man who is like, I know she doesn't want to hear this, but I have to share my truth, the wholeness of my truth. And they're two very different, and they can be received very differently. One can trigger us in anger, and so can the other. And so I think there's a conversation maybe that needs to be had more openly around the desire from women. I don't know if you feel this. Women just want the truth because that's where we can feel safe. And it is the withholding of the truth, or when we feel like you lied or withheld, the lack of trust breaks that bond of safety.
Yeah.
And so that's the betrayal, if that makes sense, for anyone listening. That's how I feel this story to you. And what it does is it steals what was also beautiful at the time, right? Because it makes us question all of it. It's like a drop of poison that makes us kind of go, well, what else was not true then if this feels not true now?
Yeah, like I feel like in myself, and almost every woman I've spoken to that's experienced some form of betrayal, they'll always say it's not what he did, is that he lied about it. Yeah. That's what hurts the most.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually, I was listening to Alison Armstrong, who's an amazing woman that teaches a lot on the differences between a man and woman. I was doing a masterclass of hers around conflict. And I really see in that relationship that both of us were avoiding conflict. I just thought we were really great at not like that. But yeah, we felt there was a stuckness in our relationship. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, actually, there was an avoidance of conflict going on. And what she says is that often men will avoid telling the truth or avoid conflict, and that they relate to conflict as death, and that if I go into conflict, like I might die. And also there's a fear of loss of respect, especially if that person is related to them being productive or gaining resources, which I thought was really interesting, because I do feel like my ex-partner had a lot of respect towards me. And it's been really interesting noticing that a lot of the things that were built in our relationship that he created have now fallen away, because I was really connected to a lot of these things, and I connected him up with a lot of the resources and the people. It was through our connection. And I mean, I can't say for sure if that's related, but it's just really interesting that he's really withdrawn himself from all the connections and the resources and the creations that he was building that have now fallen away, which I think is sad in a way, because it was really, he was doing some amazing things. And obviously I can't say for sure, why he's made those choices. But I can see like this avoidance of conflict can really play and like keep men really shut down. And for me, and just to be clear, like there was other dishonesty and betrayal in the relationship that I haven't spoken a lot to. And there was emotional cheating with this woman. And that's something that I want to really recognize really when I'm like, oh, actually, like confiding in another woman around things that you're not telling your partner, that is emotional cheating. And there was an awareness of that those things were going on until later down the track. So there are these other pieces, the other things that did happen.
Yeah, of course. And I guess the key thing, two things that come to mind as I listened just now to what you shared. I forget who it was on Instagram, but I really loved it. It was just someone sharing on a story around their essentially their rules of their love bubble or their container. And one of them was that no one other than us should know more than we do. The way they worded it was really important in the sense that what they were trying to say is we don't confide in others more than we confide in each other around what's going on for us. And I thought that was really valuable. And it kind of speaks to what you're saying about emotional betrayals, because that can hurt more for some people, depending especially on love language and where you resource safety. And then the other thing is coming back to the conflict piece. This is huge. And I know this for myself, and I feel like the greatest experts in the relationship space who speak to longevity in relationships always say it's not whether you're compatible, it's not your chemistry, it's how well you deal with conflict. And I had a 17-year-long, highly compatible, non-conflict, infused relationship with my, first husband, life partner, parent of my, co-parent of my beautiful girls. And we were highly compatible. In fact, we had that relationship that people looked at and were like, oh, look at their marriage. They're like two best friends. They get on so well. They're into the same things. We were wildly codependent in truth, and our wounds were like, wiring over each other in really ineffective ways. And yet we never fought. And it was only in, the growth that occurred after that, sideswiping, betrayal, and really, that was something I called in through my soul. So, I imagine you did as well with this, because we did. But notwithstanding that, I remember the value of looking in, particularly in my current relationship, around the codes I had for conflict. And what I came to realize, and I know you said before that men coded as death, I came to realize through my own upbringing, my parents, again, very compatible. The only times they quote unquote fought, like that I remember fighting, was when there were affairs and their marriage nearly ended. And so I thought conflict meant you're out, like it's on, it's the only time you fight is like when it's over, when you're ending. And with my new partner, who was very masculine, which is exactly what I needed, because I needed to be taken out of that role, right? That was not the role I wanted inside my intimate partnership. But when we would fight, my goodness, they were so intense. I'd never experienced fighting like that, because there was so much passion and like masculine energy, really. We didn't really know how to fight constructively initially either. But I remember I was like, well, we're done now. Like, obviously we're done if we fight like that. That was what I realized. And he'd be like, well, he was raised in a much more, I guess, conflict ready or conflict alive household. Conflict was very common in his household. And so it was just really interesting to notice our codes around conflict, because every time it would happen, I'd be like, oh, well, we're done. And yet I'd never fought in my previous relationship. So I didn't know how to do it well. I had to learn how to do it well. And I think we do. I think we as a particularly in partnership, but all like whether it's business or, to your children, like learning to deal with differences and perspectives and our inner wounds and our fears, that's conflict. And it's an opportunity for us to go deeper in connection if we choose to approach it correctly. And so I love that you kind of said that what came up for you is, your wound around abandonment. And I don't know about you, but every time, a relationship, well, either up levels or ends, all we really get to integrate is our next layer of growth. And so for you now, out of this beautiful 3-year relationship, and then this kind of alchemization of this wounding, what do you feel has been, I guess, the antidote? What's been the thing that you've gotten to expand into and unfold in a positive way as a result of that pain?
Yeah, so one of the things I did is I actually came home to New Zealand, which I really haven't spent a lot of time here, and I got to spend some time with my parents, who are actually divorced and have been for a long time. And we had some really beautiful times together, the three of us, which was deeply healing for me. So doing inner child work, like really holding myself, doing somatic practices, nervous system regulation, have really been helpful. And also, if anything, one of the biggest things is just allowing myself to feel the grief, to feel the pain. And it, like, I would say it's probably actually the most grief I've ever felt in my life. And it's not just what happened with him, it's like the person before and the before and the before. You know, it's all of the past that I thought I'd healed, but there's more. So and just allowing, giving myself permission to feel it all. And the amount of grief is like deep howling grief that I was feeling like I'd never experienced before. And I feel like lifetimes of grief, like generational trauma that is being felt and expressed around this betrayal and abandonment, and just like really letting it move through me. And that is like, it's been really interesting, because my projections have been that, you know, he's just being avoidant, and here I am feeling it all, like. And then I remind myself, I was like, okay, just remember, you're the one that's better off, because you're actually feeling I mean, obviously I have no idea what he's doing, but like that's my projection of like, oh, like he's avoiding it all and I'm feeling it all.
Yeah.
But that's the life I decided what I chose, right?
Well, yeah. And I mean, I guess the work in, well, let's talk about that for a second, actually, because a lot of people listening will be like, well, far out, I don't want to feel all the grief of all of the lifetimes of all of the generations of all of the things in this life. I've been actively suppressing that, or I've been actively, you know, coping with that. And, you know, that's something that when we talk about growth work, and particularly shadow work, people just step back often, because it's like, why would I consciously want to process uncomfortable feelings? And so for someone who maybe isn't in the space where they might see the benefit to that, what would you say to someone? You know, what's the, I mean, I know the benefit of howling on, you know, my lounge room floor and processing, you know, anger, but why do you think that you are the lucky one for having done that, whether he's doing it or not?
I'm so lucky. Well, the reason why I say that I'm better off for doing that is because it really is like feeling grief and feeling those depths is the key to joy and freedom. I can't feel true joy and love and freedom if I'm not willing to feel the depths of all the uncomfortable emotions. So I know that, I'm very aware that that's part of it. And if I was to distract myself, numb, avoid, it's highly likely that I'm actually going to co-create this in the future with someone else. And I'm like, nah, I'm not doing this again. I'm ready for something different. And it's time that I heal this, because, and look, I've healed a lot, and like the way he was with me in relationship was the most loving, kind, like the way that he treated me was beautiful. I'd been in very toxic, abusive relationships before, and you know, this man would never have like laid a hand on me, or never like manipulated me, you know, consciously to like, I've been in narcissistic relationships previously. So I'd already like changed my patterns massively, but there was still some pieces here, obviously, around trust and betrayal and abandonment that I needed to move through and work through. And I had the opportunity, and at the end of every relationship or loss, we always have an opportunity whether we're going to feel it and heal it, or whether we're going to numb it, shut down, avoid, and then create the same pattern in someone else.
Yes. And so for someone again listening, would you say then that when we talk about healing so that we don't recreate, because let's be honest, I mean, you can decide for whatever reason patterns repeat, like whatever you choose to believe about that, whether it's just the universe giving us an opportunity to expand and evolve and elevate by very kindly bringing us back the same experience until we're prepared to learn and up level. It's like, no, you didn't quite get it, try again. Nope, you're still not getting it, try again. So I agree with you, but for someone listening, it's like, so I just feel sad, because what's the difference or the distinction, I guess, between people who are like, oh, I went through heartbreak, I felt terrible, I was so sad, I cried for months, and then they go and find another relationship and they didn't really integrate it, they didn't really be with it, but they felt feelings. Does that make sense? I feel like maybe there's a discord between those of us in, the growth or trauma-informed space talking about integrating and processing versus people who are like, well, I feel like shit, so don't tell me I didn't process. But there is a difference, isn't there? In some regards. So what would you say the difference is?
Well, I would say that there is a process to it, and the first thing is we have to feel everything, like that's part of it. And then we've got to choose to self-reflect. And this is the self-responsibility piece of like, okay, how did I actually unconsciously create this? What is this pattern? And do I need to do some reparenting work, some inner child work to change that? So that, and then look at, where was I betrayed, or, what's happened when I was younger that's unconsciously creating, how is this familiar to me? And then what perhaps did I do in the relationship that actually created me playing out this pattern in some way? And look, I can see that, if I look back, like my ex-partner had literally was going through a separation when I met him, had been married for I think 25 years, and he had no time to heal between his ex-wife and me. Like he hadn't done that healing, and so like he just, it's the same thing, right? I've chose someone that hadn't cleaned up really fully from their past, and so that stuff was still carried on, and then they've done the same thing essentially, and so for me, like I chose that, instead of like now knowing what I know now, that's a red flag for me. If I meet someone and they're just coming out of a relationship, they haven't really gone deep in understanding like how they gave their power away or what their boundaries are, or how they were codependent, all that kind of stuff, then I'm not available for that. Because I need to know that they've done their work, as I am doing that work as well, right? And looking at those relationships. So, and I can see how pieces of control came out because I didn't trust. So I can see that like I was micromanaging was one of my things. So like micromanaging things and checking in, and not fully trusting him to make decisions, which can then make a man feel emasculated, and then they can feel suppressed, and then they might, go and do things that are shadowy, or, just things that are happening behind the scenes to try and get their needs met that perhaps aren't getting met in their relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that what I'm hearing you say, if we were to map it as a step, is firstly feel all the feelings and validate it, instead of trying to soldier through or like, suck it up, buttercup. And then also to be radically responsible and do a really honest audit of your part and how you were a co-creator in that experience. Because I agree with you, if you just project and it's like, well, he was an asshole and he's a dick, well, newsflash, if that continues to be the story, the next guy's going to be an asshole and a dick too, because that's the frequency that's why, you are that powerful. If we could remember that we're that powerful, that we're going to call in the perfect, an accompaniment to our growth. If that's what he is, then where and how and why are you calling in such a partner? And I think that's the distinction between just feeling shit and growing through, some shit, right? It's planting the seeds for change. And then I love what you're saying, which is also then changing the behavior and making more empowered choices. So now it's like, well, that is a red flag for me, and getting curious in the moment, like where and how, how is this different, or how is it the same, so that we can consciously choose not to repeat patterns of the past.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the amount of growth and the shadows that I've seen has been wild. I'm like, wow, and it's so interesting because I felt in the relationship that I'd stopped growing, like I felt stuck, and I wanted more growth, and the universe delivered.
I always laugh about that. Sometimes I'm like, Jesus, Source, could you just give me a break for a second? And then I'm like, given my highest value is growth, and I run a school of growth, I'm like, it's kind of no wonder that I keep getting just opportunities. So yeah, I often talk about it being, a little more ease-filled would be nice too at times, right?
Yeah, totally.
We don't always get to choose how it gets delivered. So betrayal wounds and noticing your patterns and dealing with the heartbreak. And at the same time, you are a facilitator of conscious sexuality. And I think that goes perfectly hand in hand with this work, right? Because it's, as someone who's trained in the tantric space and, trauma informed as well, I often say that sex in particular in our society is perhaps the most shadowy area, that exists. Therefore holds the potential for the most light, right? Because that's all shadow is, blocked light. And so, as you've been, and I know I guess I feel a little bit like I know because I've been watching you on social media, but I want you to sort of share how you've integrated. Well, firstly, let's answer the two-part question. First part of the question is this: what is conscious sexuality in your experience as someone who, runs teacher trainings and facilitations in this work? First question. Second question is, how have you used conscious sexuality as a part of your healing and integration? Because I know you have been recently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so conscious sexuality to me is really having much more self-awareness around our sexuality and our choices that we're making, and particularly our connection to our bodies and listening to our bodies and what we're exploring. And when we're being physically intimate with someone or being sexual with someone, like really listening to, is this actually in my truth? Do I want to explore this? What is my body saying? What does my body need? And this is where, if we bring in the trauma-informed lens, something that we talk about is noticing when we're getting a bit dysregulated and having awareness of that, how we can support ourselves to come back into center and be really present. So it is having a whole new level of awareness around our sexuality. And one thing I'm very big on is curiosity, and being curious about our desires, about our fears, about what we want to explore, what we want to edge into, and being curious about another as well.
And so, I talk a lot about nervous system regulation, kind of for everything, because centered, we can't find like the truth, right? We're in a fight or flight reflex. But when you speak around tuning into your body from a sexuality standpoint and knowing what you want and what you desire and what you don't, and knowing when you're dysregulated, I'm really curious on a day-to-day level. Like, say a woman is listening and is like, well, I feel like my sex life is just a bit stuck. Maybe I've been married to my partner for a long time, or maybe I'm single and I'm just not. Like, they'd say it's dead in the water. Like, how does this pertain to them? Like, how does dysregulation, or even knowing what your body wants or doesn't want, how do we do that in the everyday? Like, what are your tips for a woman for being able to, what if she's like, well, I don't want anything? Then what, how does she know if she's dysregulated, and how does she know what she wants on a really basic level? What tips would you say start with this or try this?
Yeah, well, some of the signs of dysregulation can be feeling really stressed and tired, or feeling shut down and actually having no desire. And so we might be in a freeze response. And this is something I actually experienced in my last relationship. Like, I would feel tired a lot. I would feel like, oh, I just want to watch Netflix. Like, oh, I just can't be bothered. Like, I've got no desire. And when I started, and it's really in the last year that I started to explore more of this, I realized that I had a lot of freeze response in my body that had been shut down for many years of having sex when my body wasn't a yes. Yeah.
I love that you bring that up, because there is maybe not very spoken about, because I feel like in society we run these two stories. One, we're taught very young as women, and again, I'm speaking as a person who associates or identifies as being really fine. If you're watching on video, there was just
that's my stepdad
walking in the background. If you're listening on audio, it wouldn't make any sense what we're laughing. Okay, so but there are there's kind of two stories, right? One is, well, don't be too sexual and don't be too into sex, because that would make you something undesirable, like a slut or a whore. And then simultaneously, we also want you to be really into sex and completely available for sex and always ready to be turned on. Like, we've got these two conflicting stories that society holds for women. And then, I don't know about you, but in my experience, not so much in my current relationship, but in much relationships when I was much younger and I hadn't done the work, I absolutely saw sex as a little bit contractual, or even obligatory, like, well, we're married, so I guess we're supposed to have sex. And when you talk then about having sex when you don't want it, I think that's a very real experience for a lot of women, partly because they have that association to it. Well, I should, like, anytime time we're told we should be wanting something, it's generally then going to lead to us pushing back against that. But secondarily, because most of us aren't actually, I guess, inducted or taken through an awareness of how to turn ourselves on, or even what turn on in our body feels like. Is this kind of landing with you? Can you see well, I feel there's this confusion for us women where it's like, well, I want to be turned on, but I'm not. And I'm kind of angry about that. So I'm really pissed off when I have to. It's like there's like a multi-layer loop that kind of worsens the more we try to be of effect. So when you say that you were shut down because you had sex when you didn't want it, say someone's in a long-term relationship and they're like, well, I don't really feel like it, but I know that if I keep not feeling like it, we're only going to get more and more separated. And, the desires kind of go downward. So I feel like I should just do it. What would you say to that?
I would say start with focusing on your own pleasure first. That's really the key, is start having a relationship with your own body and your own pleasure. I would say learn about boundaries and consent, and how to really listen to your body and listen to, this is my body saying a yes, this is my body saying a no. One of the things that I really started doing was to just shaking out my body every day, like moving my body and starting to unlock my freeze response that was really shut down. And then, getting really clear on, okay, this is a yes and my no with myself as well, in my own pleasure. If let's say I'm giving myself genital touch, or I'm wanting to explore self-penetration, it's also listening to that, like when that is a yes and when that's a no, and being able to honor that, because then we start to trust our own bodies. And then learning to be able to speak our boundaries with another person, and knowing oh, hang on, I've just disassociated, I've gone into my head. That means that I'm actually not able to fully give a yes right now to whatever's happening. I'm disassociated, I'm not here. Yeah. And it might mean that in that moment you take a pause with that person, and you might have an agreement to say the word pause, or use the word orange. We use the traffic light system a lot in conscious sexuality. So orange means we need to pause, we need to slow down, I'm approaching a limit. And we might just breathe together until I feel like I'm back in my body, and it's now back into a yes for me. And then your body starts to learn, your nervous system starts to be able to trust you more, and you start to get more in your body. And also another thing we talk about a lot is titration, which means starting to edge just a little bit. So let's say I'm with a partner and we're doing something new or exploring something, or maybe something that has been where I have felt shut down before, but I'm really curious about it. And we might edge. And if I start to feel shut down, that's when I might call a pause. Then we start to breathe together. I start to notice the sensations in my body. I bring myself to full body awareness to what I'm feeling. And then, okay, we're going to go again, and we're going to edge a little bit more until I call another pause. And then we start to practice essentially being creating a trust, not with ourselves, but also with the other person, and intimacy, and our bodies start to relax because it can trust us to speak up for ourselves. And then we start to feel safer. And then if the other person is honoring that and is fully present with us, then we feel safe. When we feel safe, we get turned on. And that's the key, is creating safety in our bodies.
It just really is, EJ. And in fact, if you've got nothing else, as someone who teaches coaches to do transformational work in trauma-informed spaces, the one thing that I say from day one is safety is everything. If there is no safety, there is no capacity for change. And so when I hear you relate this to conscious sexuality, I just want to maybe amplify or underline or bold capital letter, whatever it is, for those listening. Safety doesn't feel sexy, and we think, given that we live in first world countries and we have access to the internet, that we're safe. And yet what I'm hearing you say, and I just want to amplify, is we're talking about safety in the soma, in the skin suit, the body. And when listening to you, for a woman who's maybe saying, I'm just never into it, I've got so much to do, well, they're, as you said, disassociated in their head. So the breath, as you said, with a pause, so just breathing and coming into the sensations of the body and coding safety to feel the sensations in the first place would be one, by yourself, and then eventually do that with a partner. So it's this slowing down into a softening and coding safety there, because in my experience, at least, sex was never very good when I was living in my head, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
it was never very good. And yet, and all of those sensations and those pleasure and that expansion and that ecstasy was in my body, but I wasn't in my body. So then I couldn't be with it, you know? And so it took, as you say, self-trust to slow down and presence myself, and even to allow myself to be fully seen. You know, I think that's a big thing for women, and to be not in control. I think that's a big thing for women. And I know for myself in this, you know, the sexuality space, as a woman who is quite, let's say, you know, powerful in her life and can create in her life, and often is in a role of leader in her life. In the bedroom, I know that my deepest desire is to be the submissive, you know, to have a strong masculine energy and to soften into that. And that's something that now, because of my language, my self-awareness, and the container I'm in with my partner, when you said earlier, like knowing your desires, I think there are a lot of women, and I actually think, funnily enough, like 50 Shades of Grey, I think back to that. And I had some women who would read that book and go, I can't stand it, it's disgusting. And some women were like, oh my God, like that's such a turn on. Like, it's really interesting. I felt at the time, as I was listening to them, kind of whether they were more in their masculine as a woman, and it was speaking into that shadow desire to be completely not in their masculine, versus if they didn't feel like they're in their masculine, as to whether it turned them on. And so I'd love for you to share more around, I guess, desires in that way, you know, that we maybe don't realize we can actually explore in our sexuality, but that you think would probably be very healing. Because I know you recently had an experience. I know you can share on your own podcast about it, and so we can link to all of your things, your potty and whatnot. But you know, maybe sharing that experience and why you chose to do that, because that's essentially, like you're saying, I call it pendulation, you know, but titration, as you're saying, you know, into that edge. That's where we come more alive, right? Is that edge of like, okay, how do I feel safety here, where actually there's a little bit of fear and anxiety? Yeah.
Yes. So what I did is I hired a male escort.
I love this. And I love that you were so open about it online, and you shared the whole journey, you shared all of your feelings going into it. So I guess, let me just ask straight up, why did you hire a male escort?
Look, it's something I've always wanted to do. So, as you know, I've been an escort myself back in the day. Well, not that long ago, maybe 6 years ago. And it's something that I was like always curious about, being on the other side and being a client and seeing what it's like. And me and my ex-partner, he actually, one of his kinks, he enjoyed me being with other men. So we had talked about hiring a male escort to have an experience together, with him getting excited and turned on by me being with this other man. And we'd actually chosen this escort together. Well, I'd chosen the escort and shared it with him, and he's like, yeah, he sounds really great, blah, blah, blah. And I'd emailed him and we'd spoken. And nothing had eventuated because of the timing. And this guy was down in Sydney, we lived on the Gold Coast. And so once my ex-partner and I would split, I thought, you know what, I'm actually going to just do this for myself. And I'm going to have this experience for me. And one of the things that I did really want to bring to this experience was actually my vulnerability. So, I mean, I'm into kinky stuff as well, but one of the things that I do really realize that I wasn't allowing myself to truly be seen in my past relationship was my softness and my tenderness and my innocence, especially because, you know, I didn't have a solid trust. And so feeling like I had to sometimes be more masculine and I had to take more control, it was often harder for me to be in that softness. And I would feel resistance as well, especially, you know, having that freeze response. It could be more edgy to be in and be seen in that more innocent part of myself. And so I'd been working on this energy within myself first. Like, that was really important. Like, I'd been every day, like, and feeling all the grief was really helpful with that. Like, it was opening me up and softening me really beautifully and cracking my heart open. So I knew that by the time I had this experience that I could really bring this into that, and even though it was still edgy. And so I had created a playlist. I'd emailed him, and his communication. So this is something I loved, and this is one of the reasons why I chose this escort. His communication was phenomenal. Like the way that he wrote, the way that I felt so seen, I felt special, I felt important, and the way he was so organized, just and respectful. I was like, okay, I already feel safe with this man. I already feel like I can trust him. And I had spoken to other escorts before where I didn't have that experience, and it was already a no for me. I'm like, no, this communication's not great for me. So I was really happy with that. And my intention was to be seen. That was the biggest thing, to feel safe, to be seen, and to also have pleasure, just all for me. Like, no need to give back, no need to please him, no need to caretake and make sure he's happy, just all for me. And I expressed this to him, and I expressed my intention, so my fears, my desires, my vulnerabilities, and I shared that all with him, and he was like so happy to receive all of this. He was like, yes, tell me more. Like, I want to know all the things so that I can make it the best experience. And I feel like men actually want this. They want to know these things, not just male escorts.
Yeah, so actually, can we pause there one second? Because I think that's a valuable learning for women, because I know that many women do run a story that sex is for a man's pleasure. There are a lot of women who think, and have had the story told that their beauty, their attractiveness, their bodies are there for the man's pleasure. I mean, this is a collective, long-running story, I guess. And yet my experience personally and professionally talking to men is that they really love boundaries and feedback and information, because then it gives them confidence. Because much like us, I think often, I was actually just talking to my daughter last night, and we were talking about men and women. It was a very nuanced conversation, but I said, it's really important to remember that the same way you have your insecurities, every human on the planet does. Even the most confident, handsome looking boy still has his insecurities. And so when we give them this container of clarity, then they can really step into it, own it. And that makes them actually feel joyful, because they know they're doing a good job. They know that they're meeting your needs, which lights them up, because who doesn't want to make someone else happy, right? So yeah, I love that. So he loved all your, this is what I want, this is what I want.
Yeah, he's happy, really happy with that. And so with the booking, I booked a hotel, and I was very nervous. I was like, oh my God, is this what it's like being a client? It was such a weird experience. And he was there exactly on time, which was, for me, I really respected him because of that. And it's also because my ex-partner was not very good at being on time and was consistently unreliable, which also creates distrust. And if we don't have trust, we don't have safety. Even though it seems like a very simple thing, like being on time and showing up when you say you're going to show up, like, it can have an impact over time, and it can make a woman not feel safe because we deem that man's unreliable. So it was really beautiful to have this man show up exactly on time. And I noticed some fear. I was like, oh my God, what if he doesn't show up? But it was perfect. And so I went down and I got him, and it came back up, and I remember sitting on the couch, and I just said, oh, I'm actually feeling really nervous. This is so weird. But then we had a really beautiful conversation, talked about, how I'd worked in this industry, and he talked about some of his journey. And then I had to say, we could probably keep talking here, and this is really comfortable for me to just keep talking here, but I need to lean into this edge. And so went and got the room ready. Well, the room was already ready, and put on the music and just asked him to witness me. And I think I danced for about 3 songs, and he said, do you want me to come over to you, or do you want? I said, I'll invite you over. So I invited him, and he came up, and he just held me and kissed me really passionately and beautifully, but softly at the same time. And he had the most beautiful soft touches. I told him that my erogenous zone is my back, and so he was like touching my back, and I was going into full-on energy orgasms, and I was like, oh, I better tell you that my body has all this movement through it it's like energy orgasms, because he was like, oh, do you not want that touch? And I was like, no, this is good. This is good. So my body was already open, and I felt really seen. And as I had opened my eyes through the dancing and the embodiment, I would look at him, and he was smiling, and I could feel like he was just so present with me. And it's like that real beautiful masculine feminine polarity. and then him coming up and holding me and then touching my back. Just my body was so open. My pussy was wet. I was really turned on. And it started with me, creating, expressing my desires, my boundaries, my intentions, asking for what I needed, and then being willing to be seen and being willing to be in my vulnerability, in my heart, even though I don't know this man. There was this level of safety there because of the way that he had received me, but I had to open first. So I had to bring that openness rather than me just kind of jumping in and trying to go into it and start, rather than just, oh, let's start kissing and get into it. There was an initial, I had to lean into my vulnerability and I have to express my desires and boundaries first so that I feel safe and know that they're honored, know that that man can hold them. And now I feel safe to open. And we actually eventually lay down in the bed and he was just pleasuring my body, and all the ways that I'd shared I'd tell him what my turn-ons are. And what's that?
He had the cheat sheet.
Yeah, he had the cheat sheet. He did. Yeah. And I was able to ask for things. And I'd said to him, if I'm going to ask for what I want, this is how I'll language it. I would love X. If I need to pause and slow down, I'm going to say pause. I'm going to ask you to slow down. I communicated all of that with him before, so he knew, and he was like, oh, this is great. I was like, yeah, I'm a dream client.
Yeah,
a dream client. Maybe not, I don't know, but I was thinking to myself, oh man, I would love it if I had a client like this.
I mean, honestly, EJ, there'd probably be an opportunity to run a masterclass or a mini course on how to make those requests, how to structure them, whether it's for an escort. I mean, obviously that would be helpful, but I'm even thinking as you share, some women listening or some men listening might be like, wow, that took such bravery to be seen by a stranger. And yet, as I was feeling into that thought, it occurred to me that some people might find it easier to do that than to suddenly be that way or a new way or more vulnerable with a partner they've been with for a very long time. It's an interesting paradox there, isn't it? And I don't know, I imagine that would be different for everyone for different reasons, but I shine for you and I salute you in doing and meeting that edge, because I can imagine just the medicine of that. And also, in my body, I'm like, I can also feel like the butterflies of that experience. And yet, having now had that experience, what was the medicine for you?
The medicine, or the biggest gift that I got out of it was my pleasure and feeling knowing that I wasn't broken. Because there were times when I felt broken in my last relationship, and I felt like, oh my God, why is my desire so shut down? I feel so broken. I need to do all this work on myself. And I was like, you know what? It's because there wasn't safety. There wasn't safety, and there wasn't trust. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I was like, okay. And I knew this stuff, right? I'm so versed in it, right? So it's really interesting, and to look back and be able to reflect and see things that I didn't see. And this is what I wanted to get from the breakup anyway, was to be able to see things. And so so I realized that also it's about creating safety for me to open as well, and that it starts with me, and it also is about who I choose to be with and how safe do I feel. And it kind of comes back to what you said earlier about the nice guys. It's like, nice guys are not safe men. Nice guys do not create safety, because a lot of them don't know how to have boundaries or speak their boundaries. They don't know how to be really, to face conflict and to really stay strong in themselves. And they will often give their power away to their woman and just do whatever she wants and pleasing and all this stuff. But we don't feel safe with men that are like that. Well, I want to hear a man's no. I want to hear him disagree with me sometimes. I want to hear his boundaries. I don't want to be able to control a man. And part of me hates that, is like, oh, I'm not always going to get what I want. What? Yeah. But the other part of me is like, fuck yeah. I have so much respect and would have so much safety for a man. I feel so much safety with a man that can do that.
This is very alive for me right now as my own awareness. And I just want to, I guess, echo back and piggyback off that, because, and I want to speak to the women that that view strong men through the filter of, oh, they're assholes or aggression. And I say this because my partner now, and I consciously called in a very strong masculine. I mean, I'm talking really strong. And what's interesting is how many women in my life do not like him. Like literally do not like him and would like me to be with someone else, and have said that to me. You know, how could someone like you, Emily, so loving, be with him when he communicates like that? And what they don't see, and it's been such an up-leveling for me in my own journey, is to understand that no one else needs to love or see my partner in his wholeness other than me. That's my job. And to recognize that the way they view him is a reflection of what they are resistant to in their own lives. And what I mean by that is, I am on my journey at my level of my growth and ascension. Whilst I also resist his nose, I have never been so turned on. It's together, you know, and the level of chemistry and the level of sexual surrender and liberation that this man has gifted me in that time, as we've gone through ups and downs and long distance and engagements and all of those things. It's because he holds his fucking line like steel. And sometimes he's outright wrong. Does that make sense? And as the woman, I have to be the guide, and I have to fight for my point. And he might take 2 or 3 days, and then he'll come back and say, you were right. But even that, then even though it's slow, and even though I'm like in the moment, oh, there's such safety in that, because he's a rock. And yet the number of women around me who can't handle him and don't like it has really shown me why we're where we are with men in society. You know what I mean? Because as women, we're like, we don't want these weak men. And yet actually we're terrified of the strong men. So there's work for us still to do around that, I feel. And then, you know, I guess he's actually away. My partner's away at the moment. And I've been talking to other girlfriends and listening to their stories about these people-pleasing men. And even though I often am frustrated with my man, I just can feel like there isn't a piece of him that would say something in a room that wasn't true for him just to keep the peace. There's no piece of him that would do that. And while sometimes I'm like, damn, just, you know, read the room or be kinder or whatever, I'm also like, the safety, like you're saying, the safety and the resourcing of that is remarkable. And so, you know, that's something I'm deeply grateful for. But I think we get to look at where we play a part, as you say. And even though we might be with men, and it's not their fault, because society also has told men, don't be scary, you know, don't be angry, don't be wild, don't be these things. And so they've beaten them down into this, you know, I guess, weakened state, let's just say. And then as women, we've counterbalanced it. This feminine uprising is like, well, we'll do it. And then we take it on. And then, as you said, we emasculate them even more. And then we're trying to call them forward, but we're sitting in that throne. So where are they going to sit if we're there? And so, you know, I guess there's this submissive dominance that we can have when we do our own work, and when we seek to sit in that polarizing position. I believe it really does call them forward, and it is possible for those good boys and people-pleasing men. I mean, they have to do their own work at some point. Obviously, we can't do it for them, but we can support them in it by recognizing it's a crutch, and recognizing it's a pattern that they've learned, and they do it out of fear, just like all of us enact all of our, you know, ineffective coping mechanisms, let's just say. And yet we can hold space for them to rise, and we can hold space for them to reclaim that power, because when they do, we all benefit, like all of society benefits. I really believe that. I think that's like the next calling forward of the conscious woman, is into that awareness.
Yes. Big yes to all of that. Yeah. And one of the things that really resonates for me is, like, I feel like we want men that can stand up for us. And if they can't stand up to us, then we don't believe that they can stand up for us. So it's about having men that can stand up and say, no, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I believe, this is my opinion, I don't agree with that. All of those things, even though I can feel like receiving that, there's a part of me that's like this little stroppy, like, oh, I'm not going to get what I want. This other part of me that's like, oh, yes, fuck yes, like, you're, like you said, you're a rock, and I know that if push came to shove, you would stand in front of me, and you would protect me, and you would do whatever it takes to make sure that I'm safe.
Yeah, there are times, and you know, even noticing my children who have had to dance with this man that I've chosen, you know, who's not their father, very, very different. I mean, they're polar opposites in their communication style and all of those things, and noticing their resistance, and yet reminding them that this man would literally kill for them. Does that make sense? Like if their safety, he would not back away. He would be right at the front, like you say, taking the arrows and doing what's necessary. And I think there are men out there who would stand behind women, you know, and say, you know, unconsciously, and not because they don't want to, but that's just their wiring. And so, yeah, there's something, I feel like there's a quote that says, you know, you want a dangerous man who chooses not to be dangerous, or whatever it is. There's this expression that says a good man isn't a man without kind of like that inner killer. A good man is a man who knows he could kill and chooses not to. It's that kind of, and I forget the quote, I've butchered it, but that's kind of it, right? And, you know, does my partner still have massive growth? Absolutely. Am I here for it? Can't wait. But I love him. Can I love him for who he is and recognize that, yeah, like he offers me so much growth. As I move out of being a very masculine woman and into more of my wholeness, where I get to dance, right? And so I love what you said there too. And I just want to presence us again that all of this, all of the growth for you, for your ex-partner, for me, for my partner, for all of us, it stems from the degree to which we can hold the safety in self first. Yes. So you know, the self-trust, like you, and, you know, I'm a very visual person. So I'm picturing you dancing in front of this escort. And I can just feel my whole body is like softening, and I can feel the emotion of that, because I know that takes deep vulnerability to be seen like that. And what kind of like holds that is that masculine container of self, that I'm going to hold trust that even if he laughs at me, even if he isn't integrated enough to soften to receive the beauty of this, and he's so caught up in some kind of judgment that he can't be present, like whatever, this is for me, and I'm going to hold myself in it. Like, you know what I mean? There's that to even step into that with true safety. That's what had to be there. And that's what kind of gets me excited. So for someone out there who is like, fuck, I don't even know where to start with self-trust. Like, you know, on a basic level, it's like, I don't want to get into anything vulnerable. I run away from that shit. And I know it's because I lack self-trust. What would you say would be, if you break it down, what ingredient or what steps or tools or ideas come to you around how do we start cultivating more self-trust?
Well, the key is to be looking at, like, where am I not trusting myself, and what are the things that I'm doing on a daily basis that where I'm not trusting, or I'm not saying that I'm not doing what I'm saying I'm going to do. You know, so if I say I'm going to do this, like, even if it's just to myself, like I'm saying I'm going to get up at this time, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to do something, like, then I actually do it. And this is something that I can own that I hadn't been very good at. And it's like, well, you know what? No wonder it was showing up in a partner, because I wasn't really cultivating that in myself. So that's one of the things. And also, I feel like embodiment is a big piece. Is like, you know, how does trust actually feel in my body? How can I feel the feeling of trust in my body? And it might be like, you know, you're talking about the masculine before. It's something I've really done some beautiful journey work with, is like holding myself in a way that is really solid and grounded, and that I really feel that I'm trusting my body, and I'm just feeling into what it's like to feel the feeling of trust inside of myself.
I love that. So integrity, like being your word for yourself. And you know, I know a lot of my audience are mothers, and this is just a reminder. I feel, again, like society has this story that being selfish is, or shitty, let's just say. And yet, if we don't serve ourselves, we can't, you know, it's that whole put your oxygen on first and be a full cup, right? But I think being integrous to your own desires, super important, and starting small. But then what you just said then about trust, and I think this loops us back, and maybe is a great place to finish today, is if we don't know the resonance or the frequency of trust in our body on a sensation level, then one of the key things we miss is that intuitive knowing, which gives us even deeper sense of safety, right? Like when you just know. And I loved when you said right at the beginning of the top of the conversation, something around, you know, a woman's intuition. I knew there was, even though, you know, I also believed what he said he was saying, and I knew we'd had these conversations, and yet I knew. And I think there's not a woman listening who can't resonate with, yeah, there've been times where I just knew. And And I don't know about you, but so often we override that with, oh, don't be silly, or like, you don't know, you're just being a psycho, or the number of times I've told myself, you're just being a crazy bitch, stop obsessing. And yet it's like a knowing and really learning to trust that and to lean into that and to attune to that is just so important for us modern women, because we got so much noise and we don't take time right. So yeah, I love that advice of really slowing down and learning what trust feels like in your body. So would you suggest like just even lying down and relaxing your body and going, do I feel safe yet? Do I feel safe yet? Like, when do I, what does safety and trust in this moment feel like? Or
Yes, exactly.
pauses in everyday life and breathing. Like, I don't know, how do we begin that even outside of the bedroom?
Well, I think you made a good point there about the body, because it really does begin in the body and listening to our bodies. So yeah, you could do like a somatic safety practice where you're lying down, or you can be sitting up and you're just scanning the body and tuning into the body and listening to what the body is saying, and listening to the sensations, and just starting to get connected more to the body and out of the mind. Like, that's because the mind, there's so many stories and yeah, it can stop us from doing so many things, and there can be so many fears that pop up. And so it's just about coming back to the body and listening to ourselves, and maybe asking ourselves questions and listening to, what does a yes feel like, what does a no feel like, and getting curious about that. I think embodiment is so essential for women, and like, you can test things out as well, like with your intuition, your intuitive knowing. And even, it's so funny that you mentioned about that, because I was like, that part that my mind was like, I'm being in that because I'm being irrational. I know I'm being, I thought I didn't know I was being irrational, but I was like, my mind was like, you're being irrational, but my intuition was like, no, you're right, this is right, you're onto it. So sometimes we're not really being irrational, sometimes it's actually our intuition.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm going to throw it out there as like a, let's all give this a try, because I like to give tangibles for the listeners. And I'm just wondering if on a day-to-day basis, even if it's like, what do I want for lunch? And then you're like, oh, I should have, maybe you're thinking you should eat a certain type of macro, or not have this. And maybe just in that moment, pausing, and instead of thinking with your head, like, feel with your body and go, is it a yes or no? And I like what you just said there. Is it a yes or no? Like, it's just because the body is more simplistic, right, in its wisdom and its communication. It certainly has been to me over the years. It doesn't tell me long stories. It doesn't, it doesn't do that. It just is like, no. I've heard my body literally say to me, actually at the beginning of what ended up being a narcissistic relationship that armored me for years, I heard it say, it hit me like a ton of bricks to the stomach, and all I heard was run. And like, powerfully, and in a very irrational moment. And I was like, don't be silly. That's going to be a bit awkward, like, don't do it. And I just overrode it. And that's what we do. And I think time and time again, most of us can agree, if we'd listened to that instinct, it would have been in our best and our highest. So why don't we tune in every day in little ways? Because how does anything grow? Tiny little increments every day. That's how muscles grow. That's how neural pathways grow. That's how confidence grows. That's how self-trust grows. So maybe that's what we could all do, is just, is this a yes or a no? And even if we're wrong in that moment and we get to, I feel for me, one of the big things around self-trust is reminding myself that when I make a decision, I have the right in the very next moment to decide differently. And we as a society tend to think, well, once you decide, you got to lock it in because you made a decision. You don't want to seem like one of those crazy people who can't just go in one direction. And yet sometimes we don't know how we feel about something until the decision is made, right? So it's like, cool, I decided, oh, actually, no, that feels wrong. I'm going this way. And let yourself look crazy to other people. But that's what attunement is in my experience. Yeah. So EJ, I actually, interestingly, I asked people if we could distill a podcast down to, a soundbite or a one takeaway. And I'm going to tell you, I actually remember yours from, and I didn't go back and look at it. I just remember it because it struck me as being so potent. I'm going to tell you what it is later, but I want to hear today. What would you say for anyone listening, where you're at and what's come through today? Like, what would be the thing you're like, hey team, like, we talked about a lot, but just remember this. What would you say?
Oh, great, being put on the spot. I'm like, oh, what was so profound from
I know
last
I
time.
kind of psyched you out there, so I
Yeah,
apologize.
that's
It's a
okay.
lot of pressure to live up to previous you, but my point is previous you nailed it, so it doesn't even matter what you say today.
Yeah, great. So what I would say is that it's okay. The key is embodiment. Embodiment is like the key to self-trust is embodiment. And we need self-trust to create safety and to be able to speak our needs and our boundaries and desires, and to open ourselves up to intimacy with another and to experiencing pleasure.
Yeah, I agree. And so many women seek pleasure but avoid opening, and therein lies the irony or the conflict. So beautiful. And we're going to link to all of the things you do, because you do so much. You offer so much value just through your sharings, even online, your free offerings. And just as a reflection, the first time I asked you this, and again, now literally as I'm trying to recall it, I can't quite remember the words, but it was very simple. And you said something like, I'm going to balls it up. But essentially what it was it's all love. And if it's not showing up as that, it's just love. Do you know what I mean? Like all of it, it's all an illusion. It's so that's right. It was something like if it's love or it's an illusion. Like it's just love basically, and the rest is a lie. Something like that. It was profound. I'm going to go find it and I'll put it in the show notes for everyone else. But it was one of those things, and I just was like, oh, boom, mic drop. It was a mic drop moment. It was so beautiful.
Great. I want to hear what I said. I was like, that sounds amazing. Need a
was.
good refresher for myself right now.
And I actually want to ask you really quickly before we finish up, because I was curious before I jumped on the call. EJ Love. Is that what does that stand for? First of all, EJ.
Emma Jane.
Emma Jane. Okay. I never knew that. And then is Love your actual surname?
Yes, it is. Yes, I was born with this last name. Very blessed.
Last name. What a blessing.
Yeah.
Well, Emma Jane, love it. Thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast today. I could talk to you for hours, and I just really appreciate your transmissions of your truth, because they are healing and they are insights for the rest of us. And yeah, you do it with such grace. And I see you and I witness you and I appreciate you. And so thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you, Marina. It's been so beautiful to be here.